Well, the 2026 recruiting class is now taking the forefront, as we mentioned last week when recapping some of the major storylines of 2025. And LSU is already off to the races in a lot of ways, particularly in state. He's Sam Spiegelman. I'm Jet Roser. This is Louisiana versus all y'all's Recruit Dat Boot. We're excited to talk about some of these 2026 guys that should already be on a lot of LSU fans' radars because they're already on the Tigers' radar pretty heavily. Sam, what's going on, man? I know we've got a few different topics to talk about, but a lot is going to be geared 2026 as well as a couple of key 2027s, including guys that you saw this weekend at Under Armour.
Yeah, this is supposed to be my off month. So, I'm looking at the calendar. It's February 18th, and I'm seeing just, X amount of days left in my off month and how much work we were talking about I still have to do when we log off. So I'm just feeling great. I'm just feeling super relaxed, taking it easy. Man, I went to sleep at 9:30 on Sunday night, which is definitely the earliest I've gone to sleep in a long time. But yeah, life is good. I can't complain.
I think we both had moments Sunday of feeling like old men because my brother and I played basketball with my niece, his younger daughter, who was showing some interest as we were kind of like out there around the hoop. And by the end of it, even playing kind of child level, but he and I kind of going at it in some spots, we walked back inside kind of hands on our hips and like, man, my back is not going to feel good tomorrow. And the girls are just wondering, wow, what's wrong? What happened? Did you hurt yourself? And my sister-in-law, Brittany, just very excited to tell the girls, well, when you get old, like your dad and your uncle, everything just kind of hurts, you know?
It's so true. I pulled my back going bowling about a month ago, and I was couch ridden for 4 days before I could move again. So, fortunately, we weren't recording the podcast, or I would be laying horizontally recording through a speaker. But we're still standing, Jared, and that's all that matters.
Just working those grandpa bedtimes now, and that's fine. That's fine. Just embrace that. We might as well jump into Sunday then, and then get into more of the LSU recruiting dynamics after that. But Under Armour next camp in Dallas as the Under Armour camp circuit really starts to ramp up. This was, I think, their second event so far, and they're going to be on the road heavily for the next couple of months. But some notable Louisiana faces, including two of the 2027 quarterbacks from right there in the Shreveport area, among the top performers. I mean, looking like by all accounts with their performance out there, as well as Kenny Darby, one of these 2026 LSU commits, and a guy who, while not a Louisiana high school guy, Booby Feaster, a Louisiana native who is very high on LSU's now 2026 radar after his recent reclassification. What did you see from those guys out there at Melissa High School?
Yeah, let's start with Kenny. This was my first time seeing Kenny live. Obviously, we've talked about him a bit on the show, and the tape pops. Obviously, he led Louisiana in receiving, and Kenny isn't the biggest receiver, but he's pretty well built, and man, is he a firecracker as a route runner. I was extremely impressed getting to see him move around in person. He tested just under 4.6. He is coming off a little bit of an injury. I think he was testing the 4.5s leading into the event and just kind of, re-aggravated that injury. But in terms of testing, yeah, not where he wanted to be. But in terms of performance, exactly where he wanted to be. He was routing up guys. He was just a really crafty route runner, able to generate separation and kind of trick up defenders and with his second or third moves. He gets downfield very easily. He took actually all of his reps with Malachi Ziegler, throwing him the rock, and him and Malachi had incredible chemistry, those North Louisiana boys. Malachi, to his credit, also had a fantastic day. Malachi, obviously, we know he has that just incredible arm juice, but I was just really impressed with his deep ball accuracy as well. I think we've talked about this on the podcast because I know I've said it, but he isn't getting a lot of help from his offensive line and skill position players over there at Benton. So to see him with a player of Kenny Darby's caliber and able to just kind of do as they want, put the ball wherever he wants on the field, attack different levels of the field, be on time, be accurate. Great performance by Kenny Darby. He was my top skill position player of the top performers from Sunday. Malachi really was in contention for the top 10. He ended up being just outside the cut. Who did make the cut was Pop Houston. I thought the best quarterback in attendance. Again, 2027 quarterback. This guy doesn't act like a 2027 quarterback. He really likes to be the leader in the room and lead with his play style. He's not super vocal, but he leads with his performance. He was drilling it. He was so on time. He was just kind of in a rhythm. And when Pop is dealing, hits all different levels of the field, inside the numbers, outside the numbers, his timing, his vision, his confidence in his arm. He doesn't lack in any of those areas. I thought with a couple of 2026 guys that are committed to Power 4 schools already, Pop was really the best, most consistent passer of the day. And then we'll wrap up with Boobie Feaster. Yeah, just reclassified into 2026. Kind of a move that we've all been anticipating for a while. Boobie Feaster is as high of a floor of a receiver as you're going to get, whether he was in 2027 or 2026. Obviously, he fills out his frame at about 6'2", 180 or so pounds. Super skinny, so he's got room to put on some weight and play at a heavier weight. But he's a crafty route runner. He's got fantastic hands. Even when he's draped in coverage, he's making catches. He's just very strong hands. He's able to work at multiple positions. They've lined him in the slot at DeSoto, but he was working outside the numbers on Sunday, and he's able to matriculate, run really great routes, inside, outside the numbers, kind of do whatever he wants out there. I think he has true wide receiver one ability, and I think he might not have the long-term upside because he's a pretty finished product. But I think with that, you get a really high floor receiver that you talked about. LSU is going to have to go out of state for their receiver. I mean, LSU has a couple of in-state receivers committed. But if they're looking for that one centerpiece to build that position group around, Boobie Feaster is definitely on that short list.
I want to get into that in a second. I mean, the receiver group for the 2026 class overall is something that I wanted to talk about as we get into LSU's approach to this 2026 group overall. But since we'll probably talk more 2027s maybe next week before leaving the quarterbacks alone entirely, you talking about Malachi's consistency on the deep ball, and that was my biggest takeaway from our buddy Cody Belair's commentary on three, was he actually put Malachi, from his perspective, a slight edge over Pop and talked about consistency and accuracy. And to me, we've spent so much time looking at Pop and Elijah Haven, and Malachi's been kind of that third dark horse in the class, a really good Louisiana class at the position that we know the arm strength, we know the size, the athleticism. And so if he's starting to throw the ball with that level of accuracy and consistency, how much more of a just complete toss-up three-horse race at the top of this Louisiana class amongst the quarterbacks does this quickly become if Malachi is kind of asserting himself at that level in those regards?
I think if you're a team recruiting any one of these three quarterbacks, and maybe if you're one of these teams that's maybe recruiting all three, I wouldn't blame you, because I think you can get any one of these three quarterbacks and be really excited about what your offense is going to look like in a couple of years. And depending on which quarterback you get, you might have more of an instant impact sort of player. And potentially with someone like Malachi, someone who if it just clicks in a couple of years, you're talking about someone who is absolutely dripping with potential. I know that's a dangerous word to use, but when we talk about this position, what do we always harp on is progression and development over time. So we've been able to watch Malachi since the summer, but going into his sophomore season, coming off a really sensational freshman season, take a massive leap. Now going into his offseason, going into his junior year. That's with a little bit of quarterback training. It's coming off of a sophomore season where he was asked to do a lot of things that maybe pushed his boundaries a little bit, but he was still able to kind of come out with the arrow pointing up. I think you're seeing what that physical upside with him able to break the pocket, make plays either with his arm or with his legs, or just extend the play and give his receivers more time to get downfield and let him rip it, because he's got a cannon. So if he can buy time and let his receivers get downfield, that's why teams like Baylor and Mississippi State are so far ahead with this kid, because those are offenses that are predicated off these speedy receivers getting downfield. And Malachi's got some juice with that arm, and he's got some incredible athletic upside. I love the steps that he made. I love the steps that Pop made in his first season starting. in a record-setting fashion. And same for Elijah. Elijah took a incredible, huge leap from year 1 to year 2. You cannot go wrong with any of these 3 quarterbacks. They're all building blocks of a future college program.
It's been funny realizing that a lot of fans, radio shows, etc., are just kind of starting to get a sense of, in some cases in Baton Rouge, even they know that this kid Peyton Houston is kind of out there and did some big things this year, but don't have as great of a handle on him because he hasn't been covered by the local outlets the same way as Elijah has right down the road from Tiger Stadium, obviously. And then Malachi has been kind of out there, kind of behind the scenes in a lot of ways for folks in this area of the state, at least. And so now they're really every time out just pushing their name that farther into the consciousness, where it's funny because we've been watching these guys for 2 years and in some cases more. But to see them start to the light bulb to go off for more fans around the state is fun, because those 3 guys are going to be an awful lot of fun to watch for years and years to come. I'd be, to your point, happy with any of the 3 for sure if I was a college program. Going into that 2026 class, we talked about a couple of the wide receivers. Kenny Darby already committed. Booby Feaster reclassifies up a year from that 2027 class and is now a 2026 prospect. When you look at particularly in-state recruiting wise, LSU has its 6 commitments now with the addition of East Ascension offensive tackle Briston Martinez a week ago, or not quite a week ago. Richard Anderson and Aiden Hall, the 2 Edna Carr teammates that we've talked so much about on here. Kenny Darby, we just talked about. Ja'Kai Anderson at McDonough 35, the electric dynamic wide receiver, and for the Ron Eagles, three-phase playmaker, someone we've talked about a bunch on here. And then Jalen Chapman, another New Orleans standout that committed late last summer going into his junior year, the big offensive lineman at Warren Easton, who has played kind of all over the line for the Eagles. And then there's 6 offers out for other in-state guys, including Lamar Brown at U High, 2-way lineman we've talked so much about, Jabari Mack, the Destrehan standout, big physical wide receiver, Blaine Bradford, safety at Catholic High, Dylan Berryman up at Ouachita Parish, Darius McKinley, younger brother of number 1 prospect last year, Dominic McKinley, and now a guy we talked more about last week, and Pook Ellis from up at Franklin Parish. Thoughts on just the early makings of this class so far, particularly with the 6 commits, all in-state guys, and just kind of the foundation that Coach Kelly, Coach Frank, and all these guys are kind of laying with the in-state flavor to get started for 2026?
I think we always say LSU is at its best when the foundation of its recruiting class comes from the state of Louisiana. And with the early foundation that LSU has laid with this 2026 group, they have a lot of talent just sitting there as to build upon. About Aiden Hall is a top 3 or 4 safety, depending on where you look in the country. Big Rich Anderson, his stock has been just completely ascending since the end of his junior season. We know ended with a state championship. Obviously the rankings are bound to follow. We bumped him into a top 30 player in the country. I know that he put on a really incredible performance at Brandon Jordan's trench performance during the Super Bowl week. And as he makes the rounds this offseason, I'm sure the tape is going to carry weight. Ja'Kai Anderson and Kenny Darby, those are 2 playmakers that any given cycle you're not going to want to let leave the state. And I love that, obviously, in this particular case, it covers South Louisiana and North Louisiana. You talked about the 6 offers that are still out, and getting Bryson Martinez, of course. That's kind of the latest foundation piece to fall. But getting that cornerstone, a blue chip tackle from East Ascension, which is a stone's throw away from Tiger Stadium. He's been to campus about 12 times in the past year. Finally, I think he said that LSU started to lead going into his junior season. So, to get him finally on board, it's another great starting point. And now it's about getting the rest of that group on board. And I think LSU has positioned itself in a very strong spot to get that done. Now, do I think that they're leading for all those prospects? Not necessarily. But do I think they're either within striking distance or in a position to close? Abso-freaking-lutely, I do. The last visit to LSU for Lamar Brown was a catalyst in his recruitment. A&M had been trending since June and really overtook LSU as his leader by mid-October. And for the first time, he was back on campus on February 1st, sat down with Brian Kelly, sat down with Bo Davis. They figured out the position. They figured out what it would take for him to stay home. And now LSU is back in the driver's seat, entering a pivotal stretch. He's going to get back to all these campuses. He's going to make a decision before his senior season at U-High. You have to like where LSU is sitting. Blaine Bradford, of course, his brother just signed with LSU, but word on the street with Blaine is that he had a more open approach. He has a bigger, more national offer sheet. Well, Oregon and Ohio State were the two teams giving LSU the biggest run. Oregon just lost firepower by getting Antonio Parks to join LSU's staff. So I think it's basically boiled down to LSU versus Ohio State. I think it could go either direction. But if you're LSU and Ohio State is your biggest competition from a school all the way up there, you have to like where the Tigers sit going into those official visits. Dylan Berryman is someone who gives me a little bit of trepidation. Both Mississippi State and Texas have come on strong with Dylan, who is in Starkville instead of LSU's boys from the boot. That's always worth noting. LSU has gotten Berryman, the talented 4-star defensive lineman from North Louisiana, on campus quite a few times, and Brian Kelly was up at Ouachita Parish last month to visit with him.
Right.
We'll see. There's still that might be an official visit. Could go different direction. Mizzou is also involved there. A lot of different teams in the mix. You like where they are with Darius McKinley. You like where they sit with Pook Ellis. You have to like where they sit overall. And then there's Jabari Mack. I think, again, similar to Lamar Brown, Texas and A&M both were making inroads with Jabari Mack. The family loves Texas. They've been there quite a bit over the past year and change. And Hallman Wiggins and Chris Jackson at A&M and Texas, respectively, have a fantastic resume as it comes to developing NFL receivers. Not to say that Cortez Hankton does not. And I think after the family got back to the boys from the boot, had some crawfish with Coach Kelly and Coach Hankton, I think that kind of evened the playing field and put LSU back in the striking distance. So in an ideal world, you're able to get potentially, 12 to 15 commitments, very highly rated commitments, be it that, from your backyard. I think if you're able to sprinkle the rest out, that's not only going to compete for a top 5 or so class in the country. That's the kind of class that wins a lot of national championships in LSU's history.
I want to get into who else might be in the mix as we kind of close this out, but continuing to focus on these 12, you talk about the foundations of a national championship, that this group looks like that type of group if you can build around it. And for me, where a lot of that starts when I was looking at this 2026 class, each round of rankings updates the last year or so, is you look at the strength in the trenches where you've got Rich Anderson in the middle of your defensive line in this class. Briston Martinez, a big, everything you could want in terms of height, length, athleticism, running around on the basketball court if you want to go watch him this time of year with the Spartans out there. Jalen Chapman, who we talk about, has been a versatile, we think is probably an interior offensive lineman at the next level, but he's a guy that has played all over the offensive line for the Eagles. And then the potential of adding Lamar Brown to defensive line, or if it was offensive line, wherever, he's just really good at football in the trenches. I think for me, I've felt pretty confident about the younger brothers, the Blaine Bradford and Darius McKinley recruitments. I feel great about the Pook Ellis recruitment. But you add Darius and Lamar potentially to that mix. Just the trench strength in state this year is off the charts.
Absolutely. You're talking about Bryson Martinez, who's a top 10 offensive tackle in the country, like you said, multi-sport athlete, and really is just scratching the surface. I feel like this happens every time you compare to previous standouts at the same position, but this is the same alma mater as obviously Cam Wire, Adrian Ely, and I think that Briston might just be the best of that group. And Cam, I thought, was better than Adrian Ely, and you know what it is. So I think that's interesting. Lamar Brown, I think we've talked about in the podcast. I think his upside as an athletic interior offensive lineman is through the roof. But from talking to SEC teams who've seen him camp at defensive line, they think that he could be the number 1 interior defensive lineman in the country. And who am I to argue? He's someone who has dominated at U-High on both sides of the ball. He is not specialized at either one. What he is a 6'5", 285-pound athletic freak who is extremely bendy and explosive and powerful and light on his feet. And I think if he does specialize at either one of sides of the trenches, he's going to be phenomenal. And he's not someone I would ever let leave the state if he was in my state. Darius McKinley, of course, being in Big Brother's Dom shadows has been tough. But I thought Darius had his best season yet at Acadiana last year.
No doubt. Yeah.
He's continuing to put on weight. I think he's going to end up being an interior guy. And he's someone who, as a sophomore, was playing off the edge and has now, like Dom, continued to get bigger, get girthier and stronger. And he's someone who I think could be a quick athletic 3-tech for Bo Davis and LSU potentially. And I definitely, knowing that family, do not expect him to go far from Tiger Stadium when it's all said and done.
Yeah, I mean, the family is so close-knit, and so as much as you sometimes will have a younger brother that wants to get away and not be – those guys are so tight. I think they do very much want to play together, and that Darius has spent a lot of time at LSU even before Dom signed, and certainly since then. I don't know that the McKinley family missed a game last year in terms of the home games over there at Tiger Stadium. And so I like where they stand with him. Certainly he played 40 or 45 pounds heavier this year. And looks like he could add that much more and has maintained that athleticism. Another guy in the trenches, you mentioned the trepidation about Dylan Berryman, and that's been kind of the buzz certainly around, I'm imagining, both of our message boards since that junior day event is, oh shoot, why did Berryman end up in Starkville instead of Baton Rouge? Because he spent so much time in Baton Rouge in recent years. You kind of felt good about where the Tigers stood with him. When you look at these 12, it sounds like Berryman is the guy that would concern you most as an LSU fan. And I guess just kind of dive in a little bit more to where things stand with him, the importance of him in this class, or, maybe not when you consider the other guys that we're talking about on this list and the options that are there just from an in-state foundation. Just your sense right now of Dylan Berryman, where he is and the importance of it.
Yeah, well, I think if this is from LSU's standpoint, if you're going to have a very Louisiana heavy class, which obviously every year they do want, you have to love the contrasting styles between potentially Lamar Brown on the D line, Big Rich Anderson, and then someone like Dylan Berryman, who kind of blends a little bit of both of the Big Riches and Lamar's game. He's built like an absolute missile at about 6'3", 320 pounds, power lifter, bulldozer from that 0 to 3 technique, explosive off the ball, just an absolute missile driving into the line of scrimmage on every single play. And I think if you're LSU, it's really tough to see a North Louisiana kid like that who had an early offer go to Starkville or go to Texas. But Kenny Baker has come on really strong with Texas, and if LSU is going to dip into Texas for those guys, Texas is going to try to do the same. Now, Texas tries to go after kids that fit a certain profile, and clearly Dylan did. And then him visiting Starkville, that's been a theme. He's been to Starkville a few times. I don't think LSU is out of this recruitment by any means. I do think of that group, I think LSU is sitting better with Jabari Mack, Lamar Brown, Blaine Bradford, and I think LSU has work to do, but certainly not an insurmountable task by any means.
You mentioned him from 0 to 3. He has so much quickness and explosiveness. They found ways to move him around where he's wide of tackle in some cases just to make offenses have to deal with him in a variety of ways. I love the way he's continued to develop, and obviously think he's someone that if you're in purple and gold, you would love to see him in purple and gold in a couple of years here, or, a year and a half here sooner than later as well, even if there is some strength to that position group overall.
Well, you can say this. Oregon was his either second or third offer, an offer delivered by none other than Antonio Park. So you could say they might be trailing now, but check back in a few months once everyone gets settled into the Capitol.
AP is just going to continue to be the darling of Recruit That. I said I wanted to talk a little bit more about the receiver dynamics, and we can loop Booby into this some as well. But they've got the two commits in Kenny Darby and Ja'Kai Anderson, who I love what they both bring to the table and kind of the contrast of styles that they bring. Darby, as much as we talk about where he is as a route runner right now, we've told this story before, but he first caught my attention in person in his ability to go up over defenders and win jump balls and some of the things he could do in the air on top of some of the early sophomore clips we had a chance to see. And then the more I saw him last spring in 7-on-7, the more I'm watching him create separation all over the middle of the field and do some of those things that we talked about on Sunday. And so when you kind of mix some of his ability to go up and get the ball, Jakai's speed, and just, I mean, absolutely the type of guy that you can't corral, so to speak, can't tackle in a phone booth, the old adage, and things like that because of his lightning quickness. And then, okay, Jabari Mack is right there down the road, a big physical guy who's got speed to his game, can go up and get the ball, but is certainly, in terms of his muscle dynamic and what he can do from a physical receiver standpoint, brings another piece to that equation. As you watch this receiving core come together, how much do you like what you're seeing so far? And how much more do you think they look for? I mean, I think 4 or 5 guys in a given class is really, what you're aiming for. And so if you can get those 3 and then one key out of state guy like a Booby potentially, TK, Tristan Keys, I think they've got a little bit more of an uphill battle right now, but they're in the mix for. But if you can get these 3 plus another guy that you have a good foundation with out of state, how great of a setting of the table from a wide receiver class standpoint does that become for Cortez Hankton and company?
Yeah, when you look at Ja'Kai and Kenny to start, and then potentially adding someone like Jabari Mack, who, like we said, is probably an LSU lean, it's safe to say at this point. You're probably hoping you can round out with a because what's interesting about that trio of in-state guys is none of them is a true slot or a true outside wide receiver. I think they're all movable chess pieces with some overlapping skill sets and some things that Jabari does better than Kenny, and Kenny does better than Ja'Kai, and Ja'Kai does better than Kenny. With Ja'Kai, you love the background, like you mentioned. He's a 3-way player at 35. But seeing him in the camp setting and then seeing him week 1 against Og, you just love his offensive catalyst kind of role. Like he's that piece where he can be the reverse guy. He can work out of the slot. He can be your return guy. He's a jack of all trades. And not to say that he doesn't do anything exceptional, but he does a lot of things at a very high pace. You talked about his route running, his twitch. He's super shaky. He's super hard to wrangle up in space. So I think that any way you can get him in space and let him create would be ideal for Ja'Kai. We just saw Kenny put on a show at Under Armour next. You love his downfield ability, his ability to run in-breaking routes and also stretch the field vertically. You talked about his catch radius, his strong hands. We talked about his ability to go up and win in contested catch situations. He's that playmaker, I think, again, inside or outside, but he's your big play threat. He showed that all season long at Airline. And then with someone like Jabari, Jabari is stuck in a spot where his tape is lacking because of the offense over at Destrehan. But we've seen Jabari in testing scenarios, in camp settings, and in 7-on-7 settings where he has just flourished. He's just an absolute athletic phenom with top end speed. That's actually, I think it's better than both those guys in that 4.4 range. Jabari's obviously great playing above the rim. He's great going over the middle. He's also excellent in space. He's got a second gear that I think both these guys come very close to. But again, the position versatility with these 3, if you're able to get that in-state crew, I think that opens the door. If you're able to get a Booby Feaster or a Tristan Keys or someone else who Cortez Hankton is high on, I don't think any of these guys is a true 5-star wide receiver 1. But you have 3 guys that I could see making plays, scoring big touchdowns in Tiger Stadium, playing that wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, kind of, exchanging big games here and there. I don't know if anyone is Malik Neighbors, but you see a lot of maybe DJ Charks in this group.
You mentioned Jabari maybe not seeing as much film yet or the numbers. I mean, certainly no one's numbers were as high as Kenny Darby, but you're talking about two all-state guys in Kenny and Ja'Kai there for their respective teams. Destrehan obviously dealt with a dynamic this year where their starting quarterback was out the entire middle of the season, and so that kind of hamstrung them a bit. He came back and was able to kind of get them rolling by the time the back half of district and then postseason got going. In the meantime, Jabari is a guy that has to kind of move around, and they're putting in some wildcat situations and doing some different things. And I thought really was a big part of them continuing to find some things offensively, in addition to the emergence of that young running back that we may talk a little bit more about next week. But I still, from watching him a year ago in the fall to watching him this past spring to then watching him this fall, feel like he continues to kind of grow into more and more of a consistency and a confidence of I'm that guy and I can go be that guy. And so if he can continue some of that, I'm really looking forward to what senior year looks like for sure, and
So am
potentially
I.
beyond.
Yeah, I think I was having some conversations with some diehards, including Cody, about the state rankings in Louisiana, and I think that we have ourselves, much like Teron Francis and Jacob Washington last year, just a very fun, competitive little battle between Kenny Darby and Jabari Mack, who are both very explosive wide receivers and playmakers. And it should be a fun little race to watch going into the senior year as Kenny looks to defend his belt as the state's leading receiver, and Jabari. Really, the formula is all there with Jabari. It's a matter of him putting together that body of work. But I think we all know that he's capable of it. He has the tremendous upside to do it. It's just a matter of, like you said, keeping the quarterback healthy and getting those opportunities, and he'll get plenty of big games coming up for those Wildcats in 2025.
Always, never a shortage of big games for the Wildcats. You mentioned before the potential of, could the in-state group get to 15 guys or so? I'm curious to see where this stretches to. I mean, if you get 10 to 12 of the guys that we're talking about here, I don't know how much farther into Louisiana's in-state 2026 class LSU is going to go, particularly if they fill spots with a lot of these guys. But I do think we will see some other guys pop up with an offer here or there in spring ball. And then once these camps hit in June, who do you look at around the state right now and say, this is a guy that doesn't have an LSU offer in 2026 in Louisiana, but it's somebody that I'm watching kind of closely and think they might be one of those next couple of guys that gets the offer, one of those final pieces of the in-state grouping class?
Yeah, I think so. I think the coaches are going to be on the road, and I think a couple of the main kids that are going to draw eyes, based especially off of how this past month with other coaches coming into Louisiana and looking at talent. I think that Hayward Howard at Edna Carr is going to get a look by Corey Raymond. Obviously, Dad played at Ole Miss. Hayward is 6'1" plus, 180 pounds, super long. Fantastic state championship season. I know that Corey Raymond is going to want to see how he moves during spring ball. I wouldn't be surprised if Frank Wilson and Corey were both at the Carr Destrehan spring game and get him on campus to see how he tests in the summer. Chris Addison, we talked about Pook Ellis getting an offer. Chris Addison camped for LSU last year. He camped a little bit off the edge, camped a little bit of tight ends. He's an intriguing athlete. And again, I don't know what position he's going to ultimately play. Personally, I like him as a defensive player. I would be surprised if Blake Baker does not get Addison and Pook Ellis to Baton Rouge to get another look at. I think there's a chance that Blaze Thomasy out of Catholic is an interior guy. Obviously, Blaze had a really solid season for Catholic. It's a program that just produces offensive linemen at an incredible clip. You get the physical and mental toughness of the Cur Dog program. And obviously the emphasis on the weight room is such a big part of their development over there. I think if he worked out for Brad Davis, I think he could be potentially maybe you have Jalen Chapman, who's going to be the center. But he's a guy that I don't know if you want to let leave the state. He's someone I know Tulane is very high on. Houston, it's a guy that potentially LSU could grow on. Speaking of that same position, keep an eye on Leon Noyle over at Edna Carr, another guy I think they'll look at. There's a couple of those tweeners, offensive linemen in the state for this year. Leon being at the top, and then one more name for you, Juju Burns out of Neville. He's someone who's visited Tiger Stadium. He's got an array of SEC offers. I'd probably say Tennessee is a team recruiting him the hardest out of Monroe right now. You know that his former teammate, of course, is playing tackle for them in Rocky Top. But Juju Burns, one of those guys who really talented safety, incredible tape. You know that LSU is going to want to see him in person. They're going to want to see how he moves, if he's just a hard hitter or could he drop back into coverage, and probably a camp potential offer if you ask me.
I was trying to count just now. I think I have 11 guys that I kind of jotted down, and you hit on about half of them right there. Hayward is someone that for a long time now, I've thought he would be one of the next guys to get that offer. I was surprised. I chatted with him heading into LSU's junior day, and he was heading to Florida. He said he hadn't heard from LSU as much as I would have thought he'd been hearing from Corey. I think he certainly fits the mold of what Corey's looking for in his cornerbacks there, and particularly with his continued development and filling out, maintaining his speed, but being that much more physical on the perimeter as he was this fall with Ed Nakar. And seeing him put together a full season, obviously he's a guy that had kind of moved around a bit in the first half of his high school career, but seeing him do that at that level this year for a complete fall with the Cougars was really impressive. And he and Blaze Thomasy were my two kind of top of the list guys. That Blaze is someone that I feel like is a matter of time before LSU makes the move, and that he would be someone that wants to be a part of that program if and when they do. Someone that really impressed me for the Bears and their offensive line this year, a program that obviously has a track record of sending guys right down the road to LSU. Addison, certainly interesting. If he and Juju get the opportunity to play together at the next level, if he and Pook get the opportunity to play together at the next level, I think they're probably going to pounce at that. And then two other guys, Leon Noyle is someone that I'm really impressed with as well. Two other guys that you didn't mention that I'm interested to watch how some of the things develop for the receiver room is if they end up with a spot for another guy. Does a guy like Roderick Tezineau from Opelousas Catholic or a Jeremiah Bushnell from Iowa potentially end up in this class as a fourth or fifth receiver, depending on how some things go with guys like Jabari Mack and Boobie Feaster and TK and all those other guys that we just mentioned. But there's certainly others worth noting, and we'll watch how spring ball goes and June camp goes. But I think a great start to LSU for its in-state recruiting efforts for 2026.
Yeah, in an ideal world, they're between 12 to 15 or so in-state commits. Just about 10, of the Boobie Feasters, Tristan Keys. They need a quarterback, obviously, in 2026. Big name, Bo Bentley out of Salina, Texas, and recruiting Jonas Williams out of Illinois, I think. And Brody McWhorter is a name he'll be visiting this spring as well, out of Georgia. They need a quarterback too. There's one of those out-of-state commits to watch, along probably maybe some offensive linemen, some help, maybe some linebackers and edge out of state, potentially some in-state more flair with the DBs, but maybe going more out of state. We'll see.
We shall see, and we'll be chatting about it each week throughout the year. The next few months, it's going to get sooner than later pretty fast and furious with the way this 2026 recruiting class starts to develop, because more and more guys are going to want to announce commitments before senior season heading into August. And so, again, he's Sam Spiegelman. I'm Jared Roser. Make sure you're tuning in each week for updates from Louisiana versus All Y'all's Recruit Dat Boot. And until next time, thanks y'all for watching.